Aang sat quietly beside Appa, completely overwhelmed by regret. Ever since his argument with Katara, he couldn't stop replaying every painful word in his mind. He blamed himself for pushing away the one person who had always believed in him. The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. Then, an unusual idea suddenly crossed his mind. As an airbender, he could control the wind itself, so perhaps there was still a way to send his apology through the air. It was a desperate thought, but it gave him hope that maybe he hadn't lost Katara forever. Inside their hidden meeting place, the rest of the group was preparing for another secret discussion. Sokka had once again created an entirely new set of code words to prevent the Dai Li from spying on them. Unfortunately, the plan had already failed because Momo had eaten the new code list before anyone else had memorized it. While everyone argued over the ridiculous situation, Aang quickly asked where Katara was. He learned that she had already left early to meet General Sung regarding an important mission. Although everyone tried to stay positive, the recent discovery that Ju Di had secretly been spying on them had shaken the entire team. Trust had become something that was increasingly difficult to give. The conversation soon turned toward a much greater mystery. Professor Zay believed he had uncovered valuable information about the legendary spirit library. According to ancient records, somewhere beneath Ba Sing Se, there existed a hidden entrance leading to the greatest collection of knowledge in the world. If they could somehow find the library, they might finally discover information about Sozin's comet, and perhaps even uncover a way to stop the Fire Nation before it was too late. At the same time, Katara secretly met with General Sung, who warned her that Long Feng was unlike any enemy they had faced before. He wasn't the type of villain who relied on brute force. Instead, he ruled through fear, manipulation, and carefully guarded secrets. He could destroy people's lives without ever lifting a finger. General Sung understood that exposing Long Feng to the Earth King would be extremely dangerous, so he quietly began gathering trustworthy allies who would stand beside Aang when the confrontation finally came. Everyone involved knew they were risking their lives. Meanwhile, Professor Zay revealed everything he had learned about the Spirit Library. Long ago, the library stood proudly outside Ba Sing Se as a place where anyone seeking knowledge was welcome. Visitors were expected to contribute a piece of their own knowledge before entering, allowing wisdom to grow with every generation. The entire library was protected by Wan Shi Tong, the ancient spirit of knowledge, who believed that learning should exist only for understanding rather than for conquest. Sadly, humans eventually betrayed that purpose. Nations began using knowledge to create more powerful weapons and stronger armies. Disgusted by humanity's greed, Wan Shi Tong removed the entire library from the human world, hiding it within the spirit world forever. All that remained behind were mysterious locations known as spirit scars, places where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world had become dangerously thin. As soon as Aang heard the description, he realized he had encountered places like this before. During his previous journeys into the spirit world, he had unknowingly crossed through one of these spiritual wounds. Suddenly, the ancient legend no longer sounded impossible. If they could locate another spirit scar inside Ba Sing Se, they might be able to enter the spirit world once again and reach the hidden library. Professor Zay eagerly volunteered to accompany them, despite having never experienced anything involving spirits. Although nervous, he couldn't hide his excitement. For a lifelong scholar, discovering the legendary library would be the greatest achievement imaginable. When Aang explained exactly what a spirit scar was, Toph immediately became uncomfortable. He described it as a place where reality itself became fragile, almost like walking across thin ice stretched between two completely different worlds. The air felt haunted, reality became unstable, and strange things often happened there. Toph sarcastically pointed out that haunted places, connected to another dimension, happened to include every single thing she normally tried to avoid. The group agreed that the next morning they would divide into smaller teams and search every corner of the lower ring until they located the spirit scar. However, they also understood that they couldn't trust anyone living inside Ba Sing Se because Long Feng's network of spies seemed to be everywhere. Katara suggested asking the refugees for help instead, believing they would be far more trustworthy than the city's officials. Even with a clear objective, another problem remained unsolved. General Sung expected Aang to present a strategy capable of defeating the Fire Nation. But Aang admitted that he still couldn't willingly enter the Avatar state. Without that incredible power, he felt completely unprepared to lead any major military operation. His only remaining hope was that the Spirit Library contained another answer that could change the course of the war. Before anyone could continue discussing their plans, Toph received an unexpected letter. It was from her mother, who announced that she would soon arrive in Ba Sing Se. For the first time since Toph had left home, her mother wanted to repair their broken relationship and begged her daughter not to ignore her. The message left Toph speechless. Deep inside, she still loved her family, but the years of being controlled and misunderstood had created wounds that were far from healed. While all of this unfolded, another important group arrived at the city's gates. Suki and the Kyoshi warriors successfully escorted a captured Fire Nation commander to Ba Sing Se. General Sung welcomed them with gratitude, but immediately warned them that life inside the city followed unusual rules. Although the Earth Kingdom was at war, discussions about the conflict were strictly forbidden once inside the city walls. Military operations had to remain completely secret, leaving Suki with the uneasy feeling that something was deeply wrong with Ba Sing Se's government. After entering Ba Sing Se, the Kyoshi warriors were escorted to their temporary residence. Although General Sung had welcomed them warmly, his warning about remaining silent regarding the war lingered in Suki's mind. The city looked peaceful on the surface, but beneath that calm exterior, she sensed political tension, unlike anything she had seen before. Not long after they settled in, they received an unexpected visitor. Long Feng himself, the powerful cultural minister and leader of the Dai Li, arrived to personally welcome them. He greeted Suki with remarkable politeness and even presented gifts from Kyoshi Island as a gesture of friendship. His calm demeanor made him appear trustworthy. But Suki remained cautious. Wanting to ensure their dangerous mission was not ignored, Suki informed Long Feng that they had captured one of the Fire Nation's highest-ranking commanders and hoped the Earth King would personally question the prisoner. Although Long Feng maintained his composed expression, Suki noticed the smallest hint of surprise crossing his face. It became obvious that he had known nothing about the prisoner's arrival. General Sung had deliberately kept this information from him. As soon as Long Feng left, Suki discussed his reaction with Tai Li. Both of them reached the same conclusion. There was a growing conflict between the city's military leadership and Long Feng's government. Information was being hidden, alliances were being formed in secret, and no one seemed to trust anyone else. Whatever was happening inside Ba Sing Se, it was far more dangerous than an ordinary political disagreement. Elsewhere in the city, Zuko continued trying to build a quiet life. Every morning he left home early for work, avoiding difficult conversations with Uncle Iroh. Seeing his nephew constantly exhausted, Iroh gently suggested that Zuko leave his dangerous job and instead help manage a peaceful tea shop together. It would provide stable work, fair hours, and a chance to finally live without fear. But Zuko refused. Although he appreciated the offer, he believed he still had responsibilities that prevented him from settling into a peaceful life. His obsession with restoring his honor continued to consume him, even while he pretended to be an ordinary refugee. Meanwhile, Toph wandered through the city, searching for clues about the mysterious spirit. Scar, during her search, she unknowingly entered Iroh's tea shop. Iroh welcomed her warmly and offered a special pear and ginger tea he had recently added to the menu. As soon as Toph tasted it, old memories suddenly flooded back. She remembered her mother making the exact same drink whenever she became sick as a child. Her mother would personally prepare every cup because she never trusted the family servants to make it properly. Then she would sit beside Toph for hours, reading stories until every last drop had been finished. For a brief moment, Toph almost smiled, but the memory quickly faded. She admitted that despite those moments, she believed her parents were terrible people. They had controlled every part of her life, refused to understand who she truly was. And she was beginning to think she never wanted to speak to them again. Instead of judging her, Iroh quietly listened. He explained that growing older often meant realizing that people made terrible mistakes while believing they were doing the right thing. Even he had spent years making choices he now deeply regretted. When Toph asked whether someone who had chosen power over people's lives truly deserved forgiveness, Iroh reflected on his own past. He admitted that many of his decisions had been misguided. Everything he had done had been motivated by protecting his family. Yet those choices had still caused pain. He confessed something even more personal. After losing his own son, he had devoted himself to protecting his nephew instead. Yet somewhere along the way, he realized he had begun trying to shape Zuko into the son he wished he still had, rather than allowing him to become his own person. Toph quietly listened. Iroh then asked a simple question. Did her parents truly understand what she wanted? Toph wasn't sure. Iroh explained that families often fail because they never find the courage to express what is truly in their hearts. Honest conversations can be painful, but avoiding them only creates deeper wounds. He admitted that asking for change sometimes hurts more than remaining silent. Still, he believed genuine change was possible, but only for those brave enough to face their own mistakes. His words stayed with Toph long after she finished her tea. For the first time since, receiving her mother's letter, she began wondering whether reconciliation might actually be possible. At the same time, Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Toph continued searching every corner of the lower ring for signs of the spirit scar. Hours passed without success. They questioned merchants, searched abandoned buildings, and explored forgotten alleyways. Yet every lead ended in disappointment. Exhausted and frustrated, they realized that they needed someone who truly understood the city's hidden streets. That person was Jet. Although everyone immediately objected, Katara believed they had no other choice. Jet had once fought against the Fire Nation using violent methods, making him one of the last people Team Avatar wanted to trust. However, he knew Ba Sing Se better than almost anyone. When Katara found him, Jet was busy selling scrap metal simply to survive. He had abandoned the freedom fighters and insisted he wanted nothing more to do with dangerous missions. Katara challenged him. She accused him of claiming to hate the Fire Nation while refusing to fight the real enemy. Instead, he had settled for an ordinary life and abandoned everything he once believed in. Jet argued that he was simply trying to survive. Katara refused to accept that answer. Finally, she offered him payment in exchange for his help. Jet smiled. He immediately raised the price. After a short negotiation, Katara reluctantly accepted. Jet agreed to guide them through the hidden parts of Ba Sing Se. For the first time all day, the group finally had a lead. As Team Avatar continued searching for the hidden spirit scar, another emotional battle was unfolding elsewhere in Ba Sing Se. That evening, Zuko returned home, expecting another quiet night before work. Instead, Uncle Iroh stopped him before he could leave. This time, Iroh refused to let the conversation be postponed any longer. He asked Zuko to sit down. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence carried the weight of years, filled with disappointment, regret, and unspoken emotions. Finally, Zuko broke the silence. He admitted that during their argument at the farm, he had spoken out of anger. He confessed that blaming Iroh for everything that had happened in his life wasn't fair. But to Zuko's surprise, Iroh gently shook his head. He told his nephew that every painful word had been true. After the death of his own son, Lieutenant Iroh explained that he had lost his purpose. Instead of standing against Fire Lord Ozai and protecting what remained of his family, he had allowed grief to consume him. Every day he watched his younger brother take the throne that should have been his, yet he remained silent. Even worse, he watched Ozai mistreat Zuko without ever finding the courage to stop him. Those failures haunted him every single day. Iroh confessed that ever since then, he had tried to make up for those mistakes by becoming the father Zuko never had. But somewhere along the way, he realized he had made another mistake. Rather than helping Zuko discover his own identity, he had been trying to turn him into the son he had lost. He looked directly into Zuko's eyes. With complete sincerity, Iroh apologized. He admitted that trying to replace Lu Ten with Zuko had been unfair to both of them. From now on, he said, Zuko had to decide for himself what kind of man he wanted to become. Not the man Ozai wanted, not the man Iroh wished for. His own man. No matter which path Zuko chose, Iroh promised one thing would never change. He would always love him. Those words struck Zuko harder than any battle ever had. For perhaps the first time in his life, someone had accepted him without demanding that he become someone else. Meanwhile, The Kyoshi warriors continued observing the strange political atmosphere inside Ba Sing Se. As they walked through the city with Judy acting as their guide, De Kobo Aang Kiwais Oitis. Suki carefully studied everything around her. She noticed ordinary citizens constantly watching one. Another government officials monitored every conversation. Military officers distrusted city leaders. Even Judy seemed more like a handler than a tour guide. It became increasingly obvious that Ba Sing Se wasn't united at all. Instead, two powerful governments were secretly competing for control. One belonged to the military defending the outer walls. The other belonged to Long Feng and the Dai Li, who controlled everything happening inside the city. Suki concluded that this invisible conflict existed because the Earth King himself was weak. Someone else was almost certainly ruling from the shadows. If they could identify that hidden ruler, they might finally understand how Ba Sing Se truly functioned. The question was, who was pulling the strings? Rather than searching endlessly for clues, Suki decided on a much simpler approach. She would use Judy herself to uncover the truth. At the same time, Jet led Team Avatar through the forgotten districts of the lower ring. After weaving through abandoned streets and ruined neighborhoods, he finally stopped beside an isolated clearing that seemed strangely untouched by the surrounding city. The moment Aang stepped closer, he immediately sensed something unusual. The air itself felt different. Everything was unnaturally quiet. Even without entering the Avatar state, he could feel an invisible energy flowing beneath the ground. Jet explained that ever since arriving in Ba Sing Se, he had avoided this place because everyone who spent the night nearby claimed to experience terrifying nightmares. Although he never understood why, he always believed the area was cursed. Aang smiled. To everyone else, it might have seemed haunted, but to him, it felt exactly like a spirit scar. He thanked Jet for bringing them there. With his job complete, Jet prepared to leave. However, curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see what would happen next. Aang warned him that entering the spirit world was extremely dangerous. When he meditated, everyone's spirits would separate from their physical bodies. Inside the spirit world, they would be unable to bend any element, leaving them completely vulnerable. Jet hesitated. Without bending abilities, Team Avatar would have almost no way to defend themselves. After thinking for a moment, he insisted on joining them. Even if they didn't fully trust him yet, he wanted to help. The group exchanged uncertain glances. Eventually, they agreed. Appa and Momo would remain behind to protect everyone's physical bodies, while the rest entered the spirit world together. Aang closed his eyes and began meditating. Slowly, an invisible wave of spiritual energy spread across the clearing. One by one, everyone's spirits separated from their bodies. As reality itself began to shift, the world around them transformed. Standing before them was something none of them expected. An enormous ancient library stretched endlessly into the distance. Towering shelves reached toward the sky, filled with countless books, scrolls, and centuries of forgotten knowledge. Professor Zay stood frozen in disbelief. For a scholar who had spent his entire life chasing myths, the impossible had suddenly become real. Yet before anyone could take another step, an overwhelming presence filled the library. The ground trembled. And Ifu and Sand. Massive owl spirits slowly emerged from the darkness. His enormous golden eyes stared directly at the intruders. The guardian had recognized them immediately. It was Wan Shetong, the legendary spirit of knowledge. The moment the enormous owl spirit appeared before them, the entire library fell silent. His massive wings stretched across the ancient halls as his glowing golden eyes locked onto the group. Every movement radiated wisdom, authority, and unimaginable age. There was no doubt. They stood before Wan Shetong, the legendary spirit of knowledge, guardian of the greatest library ever created. Before anyone could introduce themselves, Wan Shetong spoke in a calm yet commanding voice. The library is closed to humans. His words echoed through the endless shelves like a final judgment. Then, his gaze stopped on Aang. Recognition flashed across the spirit's face. He remembered the young Avatar, not as a hero, but
as someone connected to
humanity's endless cycle of conflict, Aang
stepped forward respectfully, introducing himself
as the bridge between the human world and the spirit world. He explained that Professor Zay was a scholar who had spent his entire life searching for knowledge, and that they had come peacefully. But Wan Shitong had no interest in listening. For centuries, humans had claimed to seek wisdom, only to twist that knowledge into weapons for war.
Their promises had always ended the same way, with betrayal. The spirit reminded Aang exactly why the library had disappeared from the human world. Long ago, Fire Nation spies had infiltrated the library searching for military secrets.
When they feared certain knowledge could be used against them, they burned an entire section of priceless history. Thousands of years of wisdom had vanished in a single act of greed. That betrayal had shattered Wan Shutong's faith in humanity forever. From that day onward, no human was welcome inside his library. Aang tried to convince him that they were different. He explained that they weren't searching for weapons or military strategies. Their only goal was to understand the growing darkness threatening the entire world. But Wan Shutong interrupted him. He already knew everything about Aang. He spoke of the battle at the Northern Water Tribe,
where the Moon Spirit had been killed.
He remembered how Aang had merged with the Ocean Spirit and unleashed overwhelming destruction upon the Fire Nation fleet. Although Aang had acted to save innocent lives, Wan Shitong saw something else. He saw another human using enormous spiritual power during wartime. To him, it was simply another example of knowledge, and power becoming instruments of violence. Spirit questioned Aang's true intentions. The Avatar really seeking peace? Or was he simply looking for another advantage to defeat his enemies? The question struck Aang deeply. He honestly wanted to save the world, but he couldn't deny that stopping the Fire Nation meant winning a war. For a moment, even Aang struggled to answer. Seeing his hesitation,
Wan Shitong became even more convinced that humans had not changed. The library, he declared,
existed to preserve knowledge, not to decide wars. Professor Zay finally stepped forward. Unlike everyone else,
he wasn't thinking about battles or politics. He was completely fascinated by the endless collection surrounding him. He passionately spoke about dedicating his entire life to learning. Knowledge itself was his greatest treasure,
and simply standing inside the library was the fulfillment of every dream he had ever possessed. Wan Shutong carefully studied the old professor. For the first time since the group had arrived, the spirit sensed genuine sincerity. Professor Zay truly loved knowledge for its own sake. Unlike kings, generals, and conquerors, he wasn't searching for power. He simply wanted to learn. The owl spirit's expression softened ever so slightly. Perhaps not every human had forgotten the true purpose of wisdom. Meanwhile, the rest of the group quietly admired the impossible library around them. Towering shelves disappeared.
Into the darkness above, ancient
scrolls from forgotten civilizations rested beside, books written thousands of years apart. Every corner contained secrets that no living person had ever seen. Sokka stared in amazement. Katara could hardly believe such a place existed. Even Toph, unable to see the books themselves, could feel countless vibrations moving throughout the enormous structure. The building itself almost felt alive. Every step reminded them they weren't standing inside an ordinary library. They were standing inside history itself. Aang realized that earning Wan Shitong's trust would not be easy. The Guardian had spent centuries watching humans abuse knowledge for war. One wrong decision could end their journey before it truly began. But if they could somehow prove that their intentions were different, the library might still contain the answers needed to save the world. As hope and uncertainty mixed together, Team Avatar prepared to face the greatest test of wisdom they had ever encountered, one where honesty mattered far more than strength. For several long moments, the ancient guardian simply stared at Aang. The silence inside the library became almost unbearable. Every member of the group knew that one wrong answer could end their mission before it had truly begun. Aang finally stepped forward once more. He admitted that the world outside was consumed by war. He couldn't pretend otherwise. But he insisted that he wasn't searching for knowledge to conquer anyone. His greatest wish was to end the suffering and restore peace between the nations. Wan Shitong remained unconvinced. In his eyes, every human claimed to seek peace before eventually turning wisdom into another weapon. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, kings make promises they never kept, and scholars betray the very knowledge they claimed to protect. Humanity had disappointed him too many times for simple words to change his mind. Instead of arguing further, Professor Zay quietly approached one of the towering bookshelves. Unlike the others, he wasn't thinking about the war or the coming comet. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he carefully admired thousands of ancient books that had been hidden from mankind for generations. Every scroll, every manuscript, every forgotten language represented a lifetime of discoveries. The old scholar could barely contain his excitement. He spoke passionately about how knowledge was the greatest treasure in existence. It wasn't meant to create stronger armies or win battles. It existed to help people understand the world and each other. For the first time since Team Avatar had entered the library, Wan Shitong hesitated. He could sense that Professor Zay genuinely respected knowledge for its own sake. Unlike countless visitors before him, the professor wasn't searching for power. He was searching for understanding. The spirit finally allowed the group to remain inside the library for the time being. Relieved,
everyone began carefully exploring the enormous halls. Every direction revealed shelves stretching endlessly into the distance.
Ancient maps rested beside forgotten histories. Scrolls from civilizations long erased by time sat untouched, waiting for someone curious enough to read them. Sokka's excitement quickly took over, while everyone else admired the library itself.
His mind immediately turned toward finding information that could help defeat the Fire Nation. If the greatest collection of knowledge in the world truly existed here,
then surely it contained something that could change the course of the war, Aang reminded. Everyone to be careful. Wan Shitong had made it clear that he hated seeing knowledge used for military purposes. If they openly
searched for weapons or battle strategies,
they would almost certainly lose his trust. The group quietly spread throughout the library,
pretending to explore naturally while secretly looking for anything connected to the Fire Nation or Sozin's comet. Meanwhile, Professor Zay became completely absorbed in the
library's endless collection. Every few steps he
discovered another priceless artifact or another forgotten
civilization. Years of searching had finally led him to the place he had dreamed about his entire life. For him,
nothing outside these walls seemed to matter anymore. As Team Avatar continued searching,
Toph noticed something unusual. Although she couldn't see the books themselves,
she could feel countless vibrations echoing throughout the enormous structure. The entire library seemed alive. The walls shifted ever so slightly beneath her feet,
almost as though the building itself was breathing. She quietly warned the others that something about the place didn't feel normal. Before anyone could investigate further, Wan Shitong suddenly reappeared among the towering shelves. His sharp eyes carefully followed every movement the group
made. He wasn't simply protecting his library. He was testing them, watching, waiting to discover whether
these humans truly respected knowledge, or whether they would eventually reveal the same selfish desires as everyone who had come before them. Aang realized they were walking on dangerous ground. One careless decision could destroy the fragile trust they had managed to build. Yet somewhere inside this endless library lay the answer they had traveled so far to find. The fate of the world depended on discovering it before Wan Shitong uncovered their true purpose. As Team Avatar quietly searched through the endless shelves, every second felt more dangerous than the last.
Wan Shitong never wandered far.
The ancient guardian watched every movement they made, silently judging whether these visitors truly respected knowledge or had entered the library with hidden intentions. Determined not to raise suspicion, Aang encouraged everyone to study the library naturally instead of rushing toward anything connected to the war. They carefully browsed ancient scrolls, maps, and forgotten histories, hoping that somewhere among the countless volumes they would discover the answer they desperately needed. Meanwhile, Professor Zay had completely lost himself in the endless sea of knowledge. Every shelf revealed another civilization he had only read about in myths.
Ancient languages, forgotten inventions, and thousands of years of recorded history surrounded him. Tears nearly filled his eyes as he realized he was standing inside the greatest treasure any scholar had ever dreamed of finding. For Zay,
The outside world no longer existed. Back in another section of the library, Sokka refused to give up on the mission.
he believed there had to be something hidden among the countless books that could help them stop the Fire Nation.
As he searched through shelf after shelf, he finally discovered several ancient scrolls describing solar movements, eclipses, and celestial events. At first,
They looked like ordinary astronomical records, but as Sokka studied them more carefully,
he noticed something remarkable. The scrolls explained that during a solar eclipse, the moon temporarily blocks the sun, interrupting the source of every firebender's power. During those brief moments, even the strongest firebenders lose their ability to bend fire completely. Sokka's eyes widened. This wasn't simply an
interesting piece of history. It was the weakness.
they had been searching for if the Earth Kingdom launched.
An attack during a solar eclipse.
The Fire Nation's greatest advantage would disappear. Their armies, their generals, and even the Fire Lord himself would be powerless. Excited by the discovery, Sokka rushed to tell the others. The moment Aang heard the plan, he immediately understood its importance. For the first time in months, they finally had a realistic opportunity to strike back against the Fire Nation. However,
Their excitement quickly became their greatest mistake. One,
Shetong overheard the conversation. The ancient owl slowly turned toward
them. His calm expression disappeared. In its place came overwhelming
disappointment. He had trusted them. He had
allowed them inside because he believed they sought.
knowledge with pure intentions. Instead, he had once again witnessed humans searching for information to gain an advantage in war. His massive
Wings spread across the library as his powerful voice echoed through every
chamber. He accused them of lying from the very beginning. Everything they had said about peace had been nothing more than another excuse to obtain military secrets. If Among desperately tried to explain, he insisted they weren't trying to conquer anyone. They only wanted to stop the Fire Nation from destroying the world. But Wanshatong refused to listen. To him, there was no difference. Every nation believed its own war was justified. Every army claimed it fought for peace. Yet every conflict left the world with more destruction than before. The Guardian declared that humanity had learned nothing. Knowledge would never again be used to fuel another war. As his anger filled the enormous library, the entire building suddenly began to shake. Massive shelves trembled. Dust
poured from the ancient ceiling. The ground itself
started moving beneath everyone's feet. Toph immediately sensed what was happening, using her seismic abilities.
She felt the entire library slowly sinking deeper into the earth. Wanshatong wasn't merely throwing them out. He was returning the entire library to the spirit world forever. Realizing the danger, Aang shouted for everyone to escape immediately. Books tumbled from towering shelves, ancient.
Pillars cracked. The floor tilted violently as the library slowly disappeared beneath the desert. Sans Professor Zay, however, remained frozen. Instead of running, he looked around in complete awe. Even as the library collapsed around him, he couldn't bring himself to leave. After spending his entire life searching for this place,
he had finally found it. He whispered that he belonged there. For him, leaving the library would be like abandoning everything he had ever lived for. The others desperately called for him to follow, but Professor Zay never moved. Surrounded by endless knowledge,
he made the impossible choice to stay behind. As the library continued sinking into the spirit world, Team Avatar realized they were running out of time, not only to escape, but also to save one of their oldest friends. As the ancient library continued sinking deeper beneath the earth, panic spread through the group. Massive stone pillars cracked apart. Endless bookshelves collapsed one after another, and thousands of priceless books tumbled through the air. The entire structure was disappearing back into the spirit world. Exactly as Wanshatong had intended, Aang shouted for
everyone to get out immediately. There
wasn't a second to waste. Each passing moment brought the
library closer to vanishing forever. But amid the chaos, Professor Zay stood perfectly still. Instead of running, he gazed around him with wonder.
His eyes wandered across the endless shelves filled with knowledge that no human had seen for centuries.
Every scroll, every book, every forgotten civilization surrounded him like a dream come true. For Professor Zay, This wasn't a disaster, it was paradise. Aang rushed over and begged him to leave. He
reminded the old scholar that they could still escape together. Professor. Zay simply smiled. He admitted that he had spent his entire life searching for this place. Every expedition, every failed journey, and every sacrifice had led him here.
Now that he had finally found the greatest library in existence,
he couldn't imagine leaving it behind. He quietly told Aang that he belonged there. The library had become his home. Realizing they couldn't convince him, the group had no choice but to continue toward the exit.
It was a heartbreaking decision, but if they stayed any longer,
they would all be trapped forever outside the library. The situation had become just as dangerous. Appa and Momo stood guard over everyone's unconscious bodies, while the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. The spirit scar was collapsing, and enormous cracks spread across the earth as the hidden library slowly descended deeper beneath the surface. Inside the spirit world, Team Avatar raced through the collapsing corridors. Stone ceilings crashed.
Down behind them, ancient staircases crumbled beneath their feet. Every escape route threatened to disappear before they
could reach it. Toph relied entirely on the vibrations beneath her feet to guide everyone.
Through the collapsing structure,
even without her earthbending, her remarkable senses allowed her to detect falling debris moments before it struck, helping the group avoid being crushed. Sokka desperately held on to the ancient scroll containing the information about the solar eclipse. After everything they had risked to obtain it,
he refused to let the discovery disappear with the library. Katara stayed close to Aang, making sure no one became separated as the building continued collapsing around them. Just as they finally reached the spirit scar,
the ground beneath them gave way. The entire entrance collapsed. For one terrifying moment, it seemed as though they would be buried inside the library forever. Then, with one final burst of spiritual energy,
their spirits were pulled back into their physical bodies. Everyone awoke gasping for breath. The first thing they noticed was the
silence. The spirit scar was gone. The mysterious energy that had once filled the area had completely vanished. Slowly, the earth settled once more, leaving nothing behind except ordinary ground. The legendary library had disappeared. Professor Zay was gone with it. Although saddened by the loss of their friend, the group realized his final choice had been his own.
He had willingly remained inside the one place he loved more than anything else in the world. As they reflected on everything that had happened, Sokka suddenly remembered the scroll he had carried out of the
library. He carefully unrolled it once again. The information confirmed what he had discovered earlier. Rare solar eclipse was approaching. During those few precious minutes,
every firebender, including Fire Lord Ozai himself, would lose the ability to bend fire. The discovery changed everything. For the first time since the war had begun,
Team Avatar possessed a real opportunity to strike directly at the heart of the fire. Nation, their mission to the spirit. Library had come at an enormous cost. They had lost Professor Zay. They had
permanently lost access to the greatest collection of knowledge in the world, and they had earned the lasting anger of Wan Shatong. Yet despite those sacrifices,
they had also uncovered the one piece of information that could completely change the future of the 100-Year War. With renewed determination, Aang and his friends knew their next challenge was clear. They had to return to Ba Sing Se, warn the Earth King, and convince the leaders of the Earth Kingdom to prepare for an invasion during the coming solar eclipse. The fate of the world now depended on whether anyone would believe them.